Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Mank, a movie about the writing of Citizen Kane, directed by David Fincher. Sounds like kind of a dream movie, like something that would greatly appeal to me, greatly appeal to most cinephiles, I guess, the whole idea of it. And I am very interested in Citizen Kane. I've heard the legends since, I've been into movies and the stories about its writing and its making, and it's seen countless documentaries. I was very much into the idea of seeing this movie, but actually seeing this movie was maybe different because it became pretty clear that this was absolutely the worst David Fincher movie I've ever seen. I don't quite get what he was doing here, and it obviously doesn't feel as much like the David Fincher we've seen previously. I feel like in most of the 2010s, he's sort of David Fincher purposefully doing David Fincher, which is interesting. He knows if you're coming to one of his movies, you expect a certain thing, particularly with The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and Gone Girl. And this doesn't have that at all, although it has the same kind of crew, this, Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor. The cinematographer did Mindhunter. Very much people have worked with him before, and he's trying to do more of a classic Hollywood thing, so much so that this film sounds like, or is trying to attempt to sound like, it's a classic Hollywood movie, using black and white for that reason, having Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross actually use instruments from the period to make the score. But it kind of comes off in this very phony way that Hollywood likes to portray classic Hollywood, which I just don't like. It is not actually like classic Hollywood movies at all, and they're usually not really saying very much with this kind of faux classic Hollywoodness thing, which I noticed the Ryan Murphy show Hollywood sort of did as well. This has a lot of similarities to that. I think this is maybe better, but I don't think I'm enthralled with either, to be honest. And it might be because why have this movie in black and white? Like, that's clearly a choice. Why have the cigarette burns other than to sort of remind me of Fight Club, where you made such a big deal and probably taught most people what cigarette burns were in terms of the reels and the jumping and stuff, and like, why only use that during that development? Like, what was the point of that? Like, he did a lot of things that were there for kind of this sort of surface level, like, this is a classic movie sort of things, but like, there wasn't very much deeper you were saying with that. It's in black and white, because this took place when movies were in black and white, and you're like, okay, there needs to be a little bit more there. And I actually, as a filmmaker, sort of expected more to be there with David Fincher. Maybe it's, you got Zodiac and The Social Network, and you felt like there's a sort of like deepness to it, or at least, there was a lot of layers you could dive into and so forth. And felt like with Gone Girl and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, he was sort of like, playing the beats, and maybe he's just not as intellectually challenging as he used to be. But this movie, certainly, I actually think Gone Girl has a bunch of stuff in it. And as much as it also is trying to demystify the myth of the fact that Orson Welles is the only person who is responsible for the achievement that was Citizen Kane, and I know everyone's been trying to do that, from, Pauline Kael to probably a bunch of video essays I haven't watched on YouTube, and countless other people, this debate between, was it Greg Toland, was it Herman Mankowitz? I actually think it's like all of them together. The whole idea of just Orson Welles is kind of foolish in itself, and this whole demystification that we're still going through, because we can't like let this idea go that Orson Welles was the only one to deal with Citizen Kane. The fact that like none of these guys ever made a movie that was at all like Citizen Kane separately, but could do it the one time they were all together, to me sort of shows that, but whatever. And I just kind of, as I was watching it, like, there's certain interesting elements to it, particularly the whole thing with the Upton Sinclair election and phrasing how that was Mankowitz's sort of breaking point from his relationship with William Randolph Hearst and Marion Davies. That element, I think, was a little interesting, although it kind of felt not the most interesting, because it still took him like a bunch of years to get fed up after that election. I get like the framing of like the power of Hearst, but Hearst did like a ton of stuff in the throughout his whole life that was controlling and creepy, and like using his media machine to manipulate things for evil. So the fact, you pick this Upton Sinclair election, which I get to see certain parallels to Charles Foster Kane, but like, why specifically pick that? Also because Mankowitz, apparently that wasn't an election that meant that much to him, apparently, according to his family. So we're not entirely sure he was super into Upton Sinclair anyway. So like, the whole idea of that was just bizarre. Like, why pick that? Like, I got some of it. It just felt like the whole thing with Mankowitz, and if you don't know, the whole legend is that Herman Mankiewicz used to hang out with Marion Davies and William Randolph Hearst was kind of their favorite party guest, which they say in the movie. And eventually he would kind of get dejected because sometimes he could be a bad drunk. Not too much. Apparently he was actually a nice guy from everything I've read, other than gambling all his family's money away, which doesn't sound that nice. But he wasn't as big of an asshole as you think. And he apparently pissed them off too many times, and they got rid of him. And then he wrote the script to Citizen Kane when Orson Welles had all this control at RKO, and he kind of let Herman Mankowitz write the script, and he was supposed to not take credit legendarily, but of course he did, because, he just wrote Citizen Kane and stuff, so he wasn't going to give that up. But he was also very proud. It's a great script. He should be proud of it. And then he won an Oscar with Orson Welles. For me, I've heard of the legend of Herman Mankowitz at Sam Simeon with Hearst and Marion Davies for so long that, like, seeing him write it in this sort of house in the middle of the desert, which is a lot of the movie, is sort of interesting. And I think those parts are better than you would think they would be. If you find out the movie's mostly that, you're like, oh, that's not really what I'd been waiting for. To me, the interesting relationship was his relationship with Marion Davies, who he was very good friends with. Kind of like more a platonic love affair is how people have said. They didn't consummate anything, or according to what we know at least. I wish they'd gone more into that, and it feels like the whole Marion Davies thing, that's another big Citizen Kane thing that they really didn't go into at all. And it's unfortunate because Marion Davies, most people just know her as kind of the bassist of a character in Citizen Kane, who had this opera house built for her, who was just a showgirl, who was trying to get the quotations off singer off her name and all these things. But Marion Davies was a very gifted comedic actress, and I've seen her films with King Vidor. I really like them, and I wish they had focused more on that in this movie. And you have Amanda Seyfried, who's a gifted comedic actress, who I 100% know could have done a great job doing a kind of Marion Davies thing on a comedy movie with King Vitor. I would have liked that instead of like all these references to her trying to be more serious, and like her idea of making her more serious actress and a less comedic actress, when her real legacy should be how great of a comedic actress she is. And I wish this film had actually done that, because there's this whole thing that when Citizen Kane really became the greatest film of all time and this big prestige name, anytime you talk about Marion Davies, you have to start off like, oh, well, Citizen Kane did her wrong. And even Orson Welles admitted that they didn't like how it sort of ruined her name, and people thought of her this way because of the big shadow of Citizen Kane. And Herman Mankiewicz as well said that. I wish they'd find a way to show us the real Marion Davies, how she really was, other than just at parties and junk, which that character I think was very disserviced by this whole thing, because you have this opportunity here. This movie, which was written by David Fincher's father, who loved classic Hollywood, and David Fincher does as well, and you get that, but it feels like they're sort of almost like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood does, where it's so fawning over this period. It doesn't necessarily want to be critical of its heroes. It doesn't necessarily want to, actually, maybe Tarantino did that more than Fincher did. Fincher's pretty much just going into how great Mankowitz was and his sort of various problems, and how, smart he was, and how, his greatness, but also a lot of his faults. But I feel like the Marion Davies thing, that's such a central relationship to how he got in with Hearst, why Hearst even liked him, the opportunities he had because of that, how their friendship worked, which you get pieces of, and everything I've read that sounds true. Not that that makes it a worse or bad movie, but I think when I look at these true life Hollywood films, when I've heard this idea currently of prestige IP, where it's basically we're having a mini series about the making of The Godfather. They're always trying to make movies and series of the makings of these classic films that have all these amazing stories behind them, which I think could be interesting. You probably do a whole thing on Heaven's Gate as well. I think one of the issues when doing them is you sort of have to tell these stories, and you can't stray from that. To a certain regard, you have to make references to certain things. You have to do this, you have to do that. And this film, I think, plays it a little too safe, and you can have more fun. Like The Other Side of the Wind, the actual Orson Welles movie that came out 2 years ago on Netflix, was more interested in taking down and making a comment on 70s Hollywood than first off than anyone's really done. Everyone's being very cautious and printing the legend over the reality in terms of doing these things, which it seems like Orson Welles was more ready to do than the children who came out and became filmmakers from being influenced by these guys, which is embarrassing. But it feels like Orson Welles would of course, be more critical of Hollywood. It would say things that you were surprised he would say. It would show an interesting perspective from it that you didn't know was there. They're very different periods of Hollywood. They're very different filmmakers at different times and all those things. But if you look at things from Who Framed Roger Rabbit to Hail Caesar, those films are obviously not, they're semi-based in reality and based in classic Hollywood at the time, but they use it as a springboard to say so much more with it. And I don't understand what this is saying other than, saying these things about Mankowitz and Hearst, but I don't think the point worked 100%. All of the parts weren't coming together to say this big thesis statement. It just felt like, we're showing how great and cool Mankowitz was and his contributions to Citizen Kane, but like, do we necessarily need that in 2020? Like, do we need that statement at this point? Like, we should already know that, and the whole idea of it is seemingly sort of a silly argument because Orson Welles shared a title card with Greg Toland, which never happened, to show that Greg Toland deserved that credit as a great cinematographer. He deserved that, and he was willing to share credit, which no one was able to do. When it comes down to it, it probably would have been more interesting to see the Hearst relationship and show his experience getting drunk with all these really important people and then using it sort of against them in making Citizen Kane or writing Citizen Kane. We don't see them actually shoot Citizen Kane. And the cinematography was really good, as Fincher usually is. Like, I liked what he did with black and white. It didn't feel like, that's the thing with it. Like, it didn't feel as interesting and fun as he usually has with color and when he shoots, with digital. And I just didn't see overall like the black and white thing. Like, I like black and white, but I don't really love that perspective of this is when it was, so that's how we're going to shoot it. But like, what are you really saying with that? And with the kind of screenwriting thing, it's not like this is how Mankowitz would have made a movie about Mankowitz. Like, that's not playing in the movie, it's just sort of like, this is because it is. And that drum thing that, like, it sounds like swing music that you have in these classic Hollywood things. Like, where are you getting that from? Like, that is not in any classic Hollywood movies. That is just so obnoxious. Like, please, everyone who makes scores for these things, stop doing that. I don't know who came up with that idea, but it is not a good one. And like, some of the score that they do sounds like authentically like classic Hollywood. Others just feels like this like pseudo, like, this is what classic Hollywood was like, kids, gee golly whiz and whatever. I really find it annoying. I don't think it captures classic Hollywood at all. It captures this kind of like fakeness of portraying the legend, but like, why do we do it that way? I've never really gotten that. There's not many classic Hollywood movies that do that stupid thing. Like, I really wish people would stop doing that forever. That's probably one of the things about it, is like, this is a film that when I was watching it, I kept thinking like, who's this movie for? Because it's not for someone who has read all these things about Citizen Kane and the making of Citizen Kane, watched Citizen Kane a lot of times, other than like the few references to Rosebud and things. It's not for deep cinephiles who I know are going to hate this movie. It's for like, the 4 people who are fascinated by Citizen Kane but like didn't watch it yet, so like, good for them, I guess. But everyone else, I just don't understand the real purpose of it. And then it tries to do that is the origin of that things, or like explain, like, they literally show the legendary monologue the guy gives about seeing the girl in the white dress and the parasol and things. I was like, I never wanted to see that filmed. Why did you do that? And immediately when that happened, I was like, if they explain Rosebud to me, I'm gonna be really upset. Like, why would you ever, like, what? Like, I don't get why you would ever show that. That was like so stupid. Like, that was one of the dumbest parts of the whole movie. You have one of these like great monologues that is clearly supposed to play in the image of your mind, and you just ruin it. You just overbear me with that crap. Like, that was like one of the dumbest parts of the whole movie. Like, you just have them read it. There's too many parts of that where it's like let's over explain one part, but then like the Rosebud thing they actually handled pretty well, which I was a little surprised by. There's parts of this movie I like, particularly I do actually sort of like the Upton Sinclair election stuff. I do like learning about Mankowitz. I found that to be fascinating because I don't read biographies on Mankowitz every day, and some of this I know, some of that I didn't, some of the specificities I didn't, and I enjoy that sort of stuff. But as a whole movie, I just I don't really think about ever thinking about this again or seeing it again. It's just sort of like an empty experience. It just like acts like it knows what it's doing, it knows what it's saying, but what it's saying is either something that's already been said before, or is just like the legendary myth of Citizen Kane, which I don't even necessarily think we need at this point. I know he said things about Orson Welles and things, but this is a film about Mankowitz, not Orson Welles. And I just wish they had had something to say about Mank, about William Randolph Hearst, about, a media titan being taken down by a movie and the fight with that. Like, there's probably interesting things to say about Mankowitz and Hearst and their relationship, and how the anger over the fallout of Citizen Kane, destroyed Orson Welles, destroyed the Boy Wonder through his big artistic statement. And there's so many fascinating things there. And then when you look at what they made the movie about this and how they made it and all the stupid things they put in it, you just sit there and you question why was this the take? Why did you choose this? And after watching it, I really don't have an answer other than this is what we chose, I guess. Let's focus on these things. And it just doesn't enthrall me as someone who likes classic Hollywood. It doesn't, as someone who really likes Citizen Kane, as all those things. I just am sort of more mystified by the idea that you thought overall this was a good idea. I feel like David Fincher's a good enough of a filmmaker to have some compelling parts, but just having a few parts that sort of work through this bit of this mess, probably his biggest mess he's ever made, is not making this work. I think you just leave asking yourself why, this was your grand statement, and I don't think that's really what you want from a big auteur statement about Citizen Kane. I think you just leave it and thinking this was a failure compared to all the greats who have had takes on Citizen Kane. This just makes you sitting there walking away, just kind of wanting to watch Citizen Kane again, and maybe not really ever having much to do with this, because this doesn't really offer anything to the conversation. This isn't like Mank. This isn't an interesting voice at the dinner party. This is someone you probably would have asked to leave and probably wouldn't have made that great monkey grinder speech to. You would have just said, maybe you should just go away and we'll just rightfully forget about this because it really wasn't needed. So if you have seen Mank and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.